The page that should have been blank, the page should have been empty. That was the first thing Thomas Every noticed. Not the dust, not the smell of old paper, not the warped wooden shelves of the abandoned county archive in Easton, Tennessee. The page. It was dated October 19, 1882. And according to county weather logs, parish records, and 3 surviving newspaper notices, the schoolhouse had been closed that day. Closed due to a sudden administrative matter, closed with no explanation, closed permanently. The students never returned. The teacher never resumed instruction. The building was locked before noon. So the attendance ledger for that date should have remained untouched blank. But it wasn't. 5 names were written in careful ink beneath the printed heading present. The ink had faded slightly over the decades, but the strokes were firm. Intentional, no trembling, no hesitation. 5 children marked present, on a day the doors were never opened. The ledger surfaced nearly a century later when the Claiborne County Courthouse began renovations. Old municipal documents were relocated temporarily to a dry storage annex. A volunteer archivist, Thomas Every, was cataloging deteriorating ledgers when he discovered the school attendance book tucked behind tax rolls from the 1890s. The cover read Claiborne County Common School No. 3 academic year 1882. The binding was cracked, the pages brittle, but the writing inside was meticulous. Each school day carefully recorded, each child's name marked present or absent with tidy penmanship. Until October 19th, that page looked different, not in handwriting, in weight. There was something heavier about it, a density in the ink. A slight indentation in the fibers, as if the pen had pressed harder than usual. Thomas ran his finger lightly across the surface. The page had not been torn, not altered. Not overwritten, just filled, and that made it worse. Common School No. 3 had operated for only 6 years before closing without ceremony. Located 2 miles outside the town center, it served 23 children from surrounding farms. 1 teacher, 1 potbelly stove, 1 chalkboard, 1 attendance ledger. In October of 1882, the school ceased operation abruptly. County minutes from that week read only facility closed pending review. There was no review, no reopening, no explanation. Parents removed children quietly. The building stood empty by winter. By spring, livestock had wandered through broken windows. By the following year, the county listed it as structurally compromised. But no official incident report exists, no fire, no outbreak, no violence recorded, just absence, and that is what made the 5 names impossible. Thomas copied them onto a separate sheath: Elijah Turner, Miriam Hale, Jonas Whitlow, Caroline Mercer, Benjamin Clark. 5 children, all under 12, all marked present, all written in the teacher's hand. A teacher named Nathaniel Rowe. Rowe had been 29 years old that autumn, educated in Nashville. Described in hiring letters as disciplined, orderly, committed to civic virtue. His signature appeared beneath each week's attendance summary, including the week of October 19th, including the day the school was supposedly closed. Thomas turned to the preceding page. October 18th, normal attendance, 22 students present. Notes in the margin: cold morning, stove malfunction. Then October 19th, 5 present, 17 absent, no explanation, no notation, no dismissal remark, just 5 names. As though the school had operated normally. As though instruction had continued, as though nothing had changed. But something had. Because county property logs show the school was locked by mid-morning that day. A deputy recorded sealing the door at 11 o'clock. If the building was sealed before noon, how were children present? If class never convened, who wrote their names and why only 5? Thomas examined the ink under magnification. The composition matched earlier entries, same pen, same ink mixture, same pressure pattern consistent with Nathaniel Rowe's writing. There was no forgery, no second hand. The teacher himself had marked those names. But for whom, and for what purpose? He requested census records for 1883. Of the 5 children marked present on October 19th, 2 families had relocated by winter. 1 child died the following spring from what was listed as lung fever. 2 remained in Claiborne County, but their adult records show something strange. Neither listed formal education past 1882. Neither ever referenced Common School No. 3 again. And in parish baptism records, Elijah Turner's family included a handwritten note in the margin: removed from instruction October, removed, not transferred, not graduated, removed. Thomas returned to the ledger. He studied the pen strokes again. Something subtle caught his attention: the letter P in present. On October 19th, the curve of the P was slightly elongated, almost hesitant, as though the writer paused, as though he considered writing something else and chose not to. There were no bloodstains, no torn pages, no dramatic evidence, just 5 names on a page that should have been blank. But sometimes absence is more disturbing than violence. Sometimes what was not written speaks louder than what was. Because if a school was closed and 5 children were still marked present, then either the teacher falsified the record, or class was held somewhere else. And if it was held somewhere else, where? Thomas closed the ledger gently. The page made a dry cracking sound. Outside the annex window, autumn wind moved through brittle leaves. For a moment he imagined a small wooden schoolhouse standing in a Tennessee field. October, air sharp, stove unlit, 5 children seated quietly, waiting for instruction, waiting for something else, and a teacher standing at the front of the room, writing their names carefully into a book. On a day the county says the doors never opened, the page should have been blank, but it wasn't, and that meant someone was present. Someone was counting. And someone wanted those 5 names recorded even if no one else was supposed to see them. This file begins with a page that should not exist. And it ends with a question the county never answered. If the schoolhouse was locked, where were the 5 children? The morning the school did not open. On the morning the school did not open, no one found that unusual. That is the part that matters. It was late October 1882. The hills outside Mill Creek were already stripped of most of their leaves. The air held that thin metallic chill that comes before the first real frost. Smoke rose from chimneys in careful vertical lines. Roosters had crowed. Wagons creaked down dirt roads. Life moved forward. But the schoolhouse did not open, and that in rural Tennessee was not entirely strange. The school had closed temporarily before floods, illness, harvest season, teacher absence. The building was small, whitewashed, with a single bell mounted above the door that had not rung in 3 days. The teacher, Miss Abigail Turner, had posted a notice the week prior, closed for repairs. No one questioned it. Because rural communities survive on habit, and habit rarely interrogates silence. Yet 5 children left their homes that morning. 5 lunches packed in cloth, 5 names spoken goodbye, 5 small figures walking toward a locked building. They were seen on the road. That detail would matter later. Mill Creek was not a town of scandal. It was a place of fields and fences and small certainties. Everyone knew everyone. The Carter boy walked with the Holloway twins. Sarah Linton carried books tied with twine. Joseph Reed always lagged slightly behind. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of a wooded clearing. When they arrived, the door was locked, the windows shuttered. No smoke from the stove pipe. No bell, no teacher. That part we know. What we do not know, what no one has ever been able to confirm, is why they did not turn back. The Holloway twins were seen near the fence. Sarah's ribbon was later found in the grass. Joseph's father swore he heard children's voices echo from the woods that afternoon. But by dusk none of them had returned home, and by nightfall, Mill Creek understood something was wrong. The first search was practical. Lanterns, dogs, shouted names. Men with rifles walking tree lines. They searched the schoolhouse first. The door was locked from the outside. The key hung on a nail inside Miss Turner's boarding room in town. The windows were intact, no signs of forced entry. Inside, desks were stacked. Slates leaned against walls, chalk dust settled undisturbed. The stove was cold. It looked like a room that had not been entered in days. And yet, on the teacher's desk sat the attendance book, closed, resting where it should not have been, because Miss Turner insisted she always kept it locked in her satchel. That detail did not seem important that night. It would become everything later. The search extended into the woods. Boot prints were found near the fence, small impressions in damp earth. Then they stopped. No struggle marks, no drag lines, no torn clothing. Just 5 sets of child-sized prints that dissolved into leaf litter. It was as if they had stepped forward and the forest had decided to swallow the rest. Miss Abigail Turner was questioned the following morning. She was 27 years old, educated in Nashville, polite, measured. She confirmed the school was closed. Confirmed she had not seen the children. Confirmed she had not opened the building. When asked about the attendance book, she hesitated just slightly, then said it must have been left there. But she did not explain how, and no one pressed her, because grief makes people gentle. And Mill Creek did not want conflict, it wanted answers. 3 days passed. Search parties widened. Riverbanks were checked, bonds inspected, cellars opened. Nothing. By the 4th day, whispers began. Travelers, outsiders, wandering men seen along the road. But there were no wagon tracks, no signs of strangers, no theft, no ransom, no demand, just absence, clean, silent, unexplained. It was Sheriff Calhoun who reopened the schoolhouse on the 5th morning. Not because he expected to find the children, but because something felt incomplete. He entered alone. Dust floated in thin shafts of light. The air smelled stale, unmoved. He walked to the desk. He opened the attendance book. And that is when the quiet changed, because the page for October 17th, the day the school was closed, was not blank. 5 names were marked present, Sarah Linton, Joseph Reed, Elijah Carta, Thomas Holloway, Benjamin Holloway, each name written in the same steady script used every other day. No smudging, no hesitation, no ink blot. The handwriting was Miss Turner's, the date was correct, the school had not been open. And yet the book recorded 5 children present. Sheriff Calhoun did not tell the town immediately. He closed the book. He locked the schoolhouse. He went to question Miss Turner again. This time she did not hesitate. She stared at the page, and she said very softly, "I did not write that." Her voice did not tremble, which frightened him more than if it had. Experts would later argue about ink drying times, pressure patterns, forgery. But the book showed no correction marks, no second pen strokes, no irregularities. The page looked consistent with the rest of the year, as if someone had filled it in carefully, deliberately, as if someone needed those 5 children to exist in that room. On a day the room was locked. That night a storm rolled across Mill Creek. Wind rattled shutters, rain struck tin roofs. Branches scraped against wood. Several residents later claimed they heard something unusual, not screams, not cries, but a faint rhythmic knocking, like chalk tapping wood, from the direction of the schoolhouse. By morning the storm had passed, and the town felt smaller, because now there was not only disappearance, there was record. A page that insisted something happened inside that building, a page that contradicted reality, a page that should have been blank. And in a town where every child was accounted for, where every fence had a name, where every road led somewhere, 5 children had been marked present. On a day that did not exist. And that is where the investigation truly began. The teacher's silence, Tennessee 1882. Miss Abigail Turner did not cry. That was the first thing people remembered later. Not when the mothers gathered in her boarding room. Not when Sheriff Calhoun placed the attendance book on her small oak table. Not even when Sarah Linton's father asked, voice-breaking, where were they? She did not cry. She folded her hands in her lap. She kept her back straight. She answered questions in calm, measured sentences. And that composure in a town unraveling began to feel unnatural. Mill Creek was not built for suspicion. But suspicion is a seed that does not need permission to grow. It begins quietly. It moves through kitchens, across porches, between pews. By the end of the second week, the word silence had attached itself to her name. Not accusation. Not guilt. Silence. Because she would not elaborate. The sheriff returned the next morning with the attendance book. He placed it in front of her. Again. Look carefully, he said. She did. Her eyes moved over the page. October 17th. 5 names marked present. The ink was dark, slightly indented into the paper. Her handwriting. But she shook her head. I did not open the school that day. You always write attendance at the beginning of class. Yes, and never after, never. Could someone else have used your book? It stays locked. Was it locked? She hesitated. That was the first fracture. I believe so. Believe, not know. The sheriff noticed her boarding house room was neat to the point of austerity. Books stacked, shoes aligned, letters tied with ribbon. Control lived there, which made the possibility of disorder feel deliberate. Sheriff Calhoun asked to see her satchel. She handed it to him without protest. The attendance bookcase was inside. Untouched, no scratches, no dirt, no sign of tampering. The schoolhouse lock showed no damage either, no forced entry. And yet, the book had been moved. By the 3rd week, the town's tone shifted. Search parties slowed, hope dimmed. The conversations changed from where are they to what happened, and then to who. Miss Turner began to feel eyes linger longer than before, at the general store, at church, even in the sheriff's office. No one accused her directly, but no one defended her either. That silence mirrored her own. It was Mrs. Holloway who said it first. Maybe she's hiding something, not loudly, not angrily, but with the weary desperation of a mother who had not slept. The idea spread. What if the school had opened? What if the children had been there? What if something had occurred inside that room? And what if Miss Turner had reason to conceal it? The sheriff reopened the schoolhouse again, this time with witnesses, 3 men from town, 2 lanterns and the key. They unlocked the door in full daylight. Dust hung motionless, desks remained stacked, chalk lay unbroken, but something felt altered. Sheriff Calhoun moved slowly between rows. He ran his fingers across desk surfaces. A faint disturbance in the dust caught his attention. 5 desks had lighter surfaces than the rest, as if someone had wiped them clean. Recently. Not enough to remove all dust, but enough to leave difference. He crouched, examined the floorboards beneath those desks. Nothing obvious, but the pattern unsettled him. 5 children marked present. 5 desks disturbed. In a room that had supposedly not been entered. That evening he returned alone. The sun had dropped low. Shadows stretched long across the clearing. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Silence expanded. He walked to the teacher's desk again, opened the book, studied the ink under lantern light. It was consistent with previous entries, same pressure, same slant, same spacing. If it was forged, it was done by someone who knew her hand intimately, or by her. That possibility hovered. Miss Turner stopped attending church after that week. She claimed headaches, fatigue, overwhelm. But towns do not interpret absence kindly. Absence becomes confirmation. Whispers deepened. She seems distant. She never smiles. She came from Nashville, didn't she? No family here, outsider. The word gained weight. One evening, Sheriff Calhoun visited unexpectedly. She answered the door in candlelight. Her face pale, eyes shadowed. You've been unwell. Yes, you understand why people are asking questions. Yes, then help me understand. She stepped aside, letting him in. The room felt colder than it should have. He placed the attendance book on her table again. Did you ever mark attendance before the children arrived? No. Did you ever correct records later? No. Then how do you explain this? Her gaze fixed on the page. For a long moment she did not speak. Then she whispered something that unsettled him more than denial ever could. What if they were there? He felt his throat tighten. The school was locked, I know. Then what are you saying? She looked up at him. Not frantic, not guilty, just deeply, disturbingly certain. What if they were there anyway? The sheriff left unsettled. That night he dreamed of empty desks, 5 chairs slightly pulled back, chalk dust floating as if recently disturbed, and the faint sound of pages turning. By the 4th week, paranoia crept fully into Mill Creek. Parents kept younger children home, lanterns burned longer, doors were bolted earlier. Some claimed they saw lights flicker in the schoolhouse windows at night. Others swore they heard faint tapping, like chalk, or knuckles, 5 taps, pores, 5 taps. Miss Turner withdrew further. She stopped answering the door. She stopped responding to letters. She simply waited, for what no one knew, and the attendance book remained the only evidence. 5 names marked present, on, a day that did not exist. But something in Miss Turner's silence suggested a possibility more disturbing than guilt. Not that she was hiding something, but that she was afraid to name it. And when fear replaces denial, truth is usually already inside the room. Waiting. The sound beneath the floorboards. The sound was first dismissed as wind. That is how most things begin in small towns. With dismissal. Late October had grown colder. The search for the 5 children had slowed from urgency to ritual. Men still walked the woods at dusk, but without conviction. Women still waited on porches, but without hope. The attendance book had unsettled Mill Creek. But paper can be argued with. Paper can be explained. Wood is harder to deny. The first report came from Jacob Reed, father of Joseph. He claimed he heard knocking. Not loud, not frantic. Just steady, measured, 5 taps, pores, 5 taps. He swore it came from the direction of the schoolhouse. The men with him laughed it off. Old timber shifts when the temperature drops, boards contract, nails loosen, buildings settle. But Jacob insisted. It wasn't settling, he said, it was counting. That word spread, counting. It connected itself immediately to the attendance page. 5 names, 5 taps, pores, 5 taps again. Sheriff Calhoun did not believe in superstition. He believed in cause and effect. But he had begun sleeping poorly. The image of those 5 desks slightly cleaner than the others refused to leave his mind. So on the 8th night after the disappearance, he walked to the schoolhouse alone, lantern in hand, revolver at his side. The wind had died completely. The clearing felt too still. He unlocked the door, entered, closed it behind him. Silence pressed inward. The desks stood exactly where he had last seen them, 5 in a row. Uneven in their alignment, he stepped carefully across the floorboards. The wood creaked beneath his boots. Nothing unusual. He raised the lantern. Light trembled across the ceiling beams. Then he heard it, faint, not tapping, not knocking, a vibration, as though something hollow lay beneath. He stopped moving. The sound stopped too. He waited. Nothing. He took another step. The vibration returned, subtle, rhythmic. From beneath the 5th desk, he crouched slowly, placed the lantern on the floor, pressed his palm against the boards. Cold, he knocked once. Solid, he shifted slightly to the left, knocked again. The tone changed, lower, thinner. He moved the lantern closer, examined the wood grain. Most boards were nailed evenly, spaced consistently. But under the 5th desk, the nails were newer. The heads slightly shinier. He had missed that before. The sheriff stood, walked back outside, fetched a pry bar from the small tool shed behind the building, returned, set the lantern down again and slid the metal edge between 2 boards. He hesitated, because once wood is lifted, truth cannot be put back. He pressed down. The first board resisted, then cracked free with a sharp splintering sound. Dust rose. He lifted it aside. The space beneath was darker than expected and deeper. The cavity extended several feet downward. Not a shallow crawl space, a hollow chamber, small, intentional. He lowered the lantern closer. The light revealed disturbed earth. Compact, recently turned. Not weeks ago, not months, days. His pulse slowed unnaturally. He expected to see something immediately. Clothing, bones, blood. But there was nothing obvious, just earth. And at the far edge of the cavity, scratches. He leaned further in, lowered himself onto one knee. The scratches were carved into the underside of the remaining floorboards. 5 vertical lines, grouped, repeated. 5 pores, 5 pores, 5 again. His throat tightened. They were not random gouges, they were deliberate, measured, counted. He ran his fingers over them. The wood was fresh where it had been cut, not aged, not worn, recently marked. The sheriff climbed out slowly, replaced the lantern on the desk, and stared at the attendance book still resting there. 5 names marked present, 5 desks disturbed, 5 groups of scratches beneath the floor. The pattern was no longer coincidence, it was design. By morning the town had gathered, the floorboards were fully removed, the cavity exposed. Men dug carefully, women stood back, faces pale. Miss Turner arrived unannounced. She did not speak. She stood at the edge of the clearing, watching, not the hole, the building, as if listening. The digging revealed no bodies, no bones, no clothing, just more compacted soil. But beneath the third layer of earth something else emerged, a small slate, child-sized, cracked at the corner, covered in dirt. Sheriff Culhoun lifted it carefully, wiped it clean with his sleeve, and saw faint chalk marks still visible. Not words, not sums, lines grouped in 5s, counted again and again until the slate surface had been filled. 5, 5, 5. The crowd shifted uneasily. Someone began to pray. Someone else whispered that this was wrong. Not crime, wrong. Miss Turner stepped forward, her face pale but steady. She looked into the cavity and whispered they were counting. The sheriff turned toward her. What do you mean? She did not look at him. They were counting the days. That night no one in Mill Creek slept. The wind returned, and with it the sound, faint beneath wood. 5 taps, pores, 5 taps. Evidence had shifted. No longer ink, no longer handwriting, now wood, now earth, now something carved by small hands in darkness. The attendance book had recorded 5 children present. The floorboards suggested 5 children below. But below for how long? And counting what time? Days or something worse. By dawn, the sheriff made a decision. The cavity would be widened, the ground beneath fully excavated, and Miss Turner would be questioned again, because silence had cracked and something beneath the schoolhouse had begun to speak. What was buried deeper? Tennessee, 1882. They dug until the earth changed color. That is how Sheriff Culhoun later described it. Not when they found something, but when the soil stopped looking natural. At first it was only packed dirt beneath the floorboards. Dense, recently disturbed, the kind of soil that settles unevenly, but beneath that a second layer, darker, older, undisturbed. And in that contrast something deliberate revealed itself. The cavity beneath the schoolhouse was not accidental. It had been widened, extended, reinforced at the corners with scrap lumber, not professionally built but not random either. Someone had carved space beneath that floor, and someone had done it carefully. The men worked in silence, no jokes, no speculation, just shovel after shovel. The townspeople watched from the clearing. Mothers clutched each other, fathers stood rigid, hands at their sides. Miss Turner remained still, listening. The first object uncovered was not bone, it was cloth, a scrap of faded ribbon, blue torn. The color drained instantly from Sarah Linton's mother's face. She stepped forward. The sheriff held up his hand. Wait, the ribbon was partially buried in compact soil, not recently placed, not freshly lost. It had been there longer than a day, longer than a week, and that shifted everything. Because if the cavity had been dug after the children disappeared, why was there older fabric below the first layer of dirt? They dug deeper. A small shoe emerged next. Leather cracked but intact, child-sized. Elijah Carter's father turned away. No body. No bones, just the shoe, and beneath it more markings, not scratches this time, carved initials, on the support beam beneath the cavity. Small, uneven, 3 letters. SL. The sheriff swallowed. Sarah Linton. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. It was realization. This space beneath the schoolhouse was not new. It had been used before, not once, repeatedly. The cavity was larger than necessary for 5 children, much larger. Sheriff Culhoun's mind shifted from tragedy to pattern. The attendance book. 5 names marked present. But what about previous months? He left the excavation and returned inside. Opened the ledger again, flipped backward slowly. September, August, June. There were days with absences marked, days with illness noted. But something else stood out. 3 entries in the previous year. Students marked present, who later withdrew abruptly. Families moved, records vague. He ran his finger down the names: Martha Bell, Henry Cole, Thomas Green. He remembered those families leaving, quietly, unexpectedly. He had assumed opportunity, work elsewhere, but now he wondered. Outside a cry rose. They had uncovered more fabric, this time darker, thicker, a child's jacket, buttons missing, and beneath it something harder, wood, another board, beneath the earth, a second floor. The sheriff stepped back into the cavity, lowered himself carefully, brushed soil aside with his hands. The second board was not part of the original foundation. It had been placed deliberately. To conceal something deeper, he pried at the edge. It lifted easier than expected. And the smell changed. Earth gives off one scent. Rot gives off another. Several men stepped away. The sheriff did not. He lowered the lantern into the newly revealed space, and this time he saw bone. Small. Curved. The lantern trembled in his hand. The cavity beneath the schoolhouse was not her hiding place. It was a chamber, layered, constructed, used. The crowd outside did not yet know. But the sound had changed. There was no more tapping that night, no vibration. Only wind through dry grass, as if whatever had been knocking had finished counting. Miss Turner had not moved. When the sheriff climbed out, covered in dirt, face gray, she looked at him with something beyond fear. Recognition. You knew, he said quietly. She shook her head slowly. No, you said they were counting. I heard it too. Heard what? The sound. When? Last year. He felt cold settle in his spine. Why didn't you tell anyone? Her eyes glistened finally, not with guilt, with exhaustion. Because no one believed the last teacher. The words hung between them. The last teacher. She left suddenly, Miss Turner said, the year before I arrived. Why, she told the county board she couldn't stay. That something wasn't right beneath the school. The sheriff stared at her. She said she heard knocking at night, and the board, they replaced her. The sheriff looked back toward the open cavity, the layered boards, the disturbed earth, the bone now visible beneath. This was no single crime. No isolated horror. This schoolhouse had held secrets before the 5 children, before Miss Turner, before the attendance page. The chamber had history. As dusk fell, the excavation was halted. The cavity covered loosely for the night, guards posted. The sheriff walked home under a sky drained of color. His mind replayed the pattern. 5 names, 5 desks, 5 scratches, but the bones beneath did not belong to 5. There were more, far more, and that meant the attendance book was not a mistake. It was not madness, it was documentation. Someone had been recording presence, not in the classroom, but beneath it. And the most terrifying question was no longer where are the 5 children. It was how long has this been happening? The pattern in the ledger, Tennessee 1882. The excavation was sealed by dusk, but the ledger was not. Sheriff Calhoun carried it home himself. Not because he feared tampering, but because he no longer trusted it inside the schoolhouse. Paper had become as dangerous as earth. He placed the book on his kitchen table beneath oil lamplight. His wife did not ask questions. She had seen his face when he returned from the clearing. Some truths do not require explanation. He opened to October 17th again. 5 names carefully written, deliberate. Then he began turning pages backward, not reading. Scanning. Looking for rhythm, and that is when he saw it. It was subtle, not obvious unless you were searching for repetition. On the last Thursday of each month for the past 2 years, attendance dipped. Not dramatically. Not enough to alarm anyone at the time. 2 or 3 students marked absent. Then those same names would vanish from their ledger entirely the following month. Withdrawn, transferred, family relocated, always explained, always ordinary. But when he aligned those dates with county movement records, patterns emerged. Families who claimed relocation never appeared in neighboring census logs. Property sales were not recorded, church dismissals were vague. It was as though entire households dissolved quietly, without noise, without trail. He copied the names onto a separate sheet, grouped them by month, by season, and then he noticed something else. On the days following those unexplained absences, Miss Turner's predecessor's handwriting changed, pressure deeper, ink heavier, letters slightly cramped. The same subtle density he had noticed on the page of October 17th. Fear leaves trace, even in penmanship. The sheriff requested the previous teacher's employment file. Her name was Alina Briggs. She had served at Common School No. 3 for 3 years before resigning, abruptly. Her letter to the county board had been preserved. He read it slowly. I regret to inform you that I cannot continue my appointment at this location. I find myself unsettled by recurring disturbances within the structure of the building. I have expressed these concerns verbally but received little response. I do not feel the environment suitable for instruction. No elaboration. No accusation, just disturbance recurring within the structure. He felt his pulse steady into something colder than fear, calculation. He returned to the ledger, examined the margins. Under certain entries, faint indentations were visibly almost erased marks. He angled the page toward lamplight. There, between 2 columns, small scratches pressed into the paper, not visible unless tilted, short vertical lines, grouped. 5, then a space, then 5 again. He exhaled slowly. Someone had been counting in the margins, but had pressed too lightly for ink, or too cautiously. The sheriff slept little that night. He dreamed not of children, but of pages turning themselves, of numbers aligning, of a building that required 5 names each season, as if feeding a ledger of its own. The next morning, he returned to the excavation site before sunrise. The guards reported no disturbance. The boards remained loosely set. He removed them carefully, lowered himself into the cavity again, this time not to dig, but to measure. The chamber beneath the schoolhouse was approximately 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, layered, not crude, not panic designed, and along the interior support beams more carvings. He brushed soil from one beam carefully and counted 5 vertical marks, then a diagonal slash through them, then 5 again, standard tally grouping. But the slashes did not align cleanly. They overlapped in places as if different hands had carved at different times. He counted the full set, 25, on one beam. He moved to another, 30, another, 15. His breathing slowed unnaturally. The chamber had not held 5 children, it had held many over years. When he climbed out, Miss Turner was waiting. She had not been summoned, yet she stood near the edge again. Her composure thinner now. "You found more," she said quietly. "Yes." "How many?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "More than the town remembers losing." She closed her eyes briefly. "They never disappeared." Loudly, she whispered. "No people leave quietly here." He looked at her carefully. "And you still say you did not write the page?" Her gaze did not waver. "I did not." "Then who did?" Silence. "Then what if it was always meant to be written?" The words unsettled him. "What does that mean? What if the book keeps its own record?" He almost snapped at her then. But something in her tone was not hysteria. It was resignation, as if she had seen this pattern before, and understood she was not the first teacher to sit across from a sheriff holding that ledger. He returned to the board under the 5th desk, measured the depth again, examined the surrounding foundation, and then he noticed something else. The chamber extended slightly beyond the footprint of the building, toward the tree line, as if once it had an entrance. Now sealed, not from inside, from outside. The ledger had shown pattern, the wood had shown history, but the most terrifying possibility was beginning to form. This was not a single perpetrator, not a single moment, not even a single generation. The schoolhouse had been built atop something, or around something, and each teacher had inherited it without understanding, until they did, and then they left, or stayed silent. The sheriff returned home with one conclusion. The 5 children marked present on October 17th were not the first. They were simply the latest entry in a much longer account. And the ledger was not tracking attendance. It was tracking something else entirely. The teacher before the teacher. Tennessee, 1882. The structure had existed before the ledger. That realization came slowly to Sheriff Calhoun like frost creeping across a windowpane. If the chamber beneath the schoolhouse predated Miss Turner, if the carvings in the beams reflected multiple seasons, if the pattern in the attendance book stretched back beyond her appointment, then the question was no longer what happened here, it was who built it, and who allowed it to continue. The original deed for Common School No. 3 had been filed 12 years earlier. The land was donated by a local benefactor, a man named Horace Bellamy, prominent farmer, church elder, county advisor, respected. Respected men build institutions. They do not build chambers beneath them, at least not openly. The sheriff retrieved the construction file from county records, sparse documentation. The building was erected quickly during a push to expand rural education, local laborers hired, materials sourced from nearby mills, no architectural plans preserved, no diagrams, just a note: foundation prepared prior to winter frost. Foundation prepared. Prepared how? He visited the 2 remaining laborers still living in Mill Creek, both elderly, both reluctant to revisit the past. One remembered digging deeper than necessary. "We thought it odd," the man said slowly. But Mr. Bellamy insisted the soil was unstable. Said we needed more room for airflow beneath. Airflow. The cavity beneath the floor was far too narrow for proper ventilation, and reinforced far too deliberately. The second laborer refused to speak of it at all. When pressed, he simply said that ground was wrong. Sheriff Calhoun turned his attention to Eleanor Briggs, the teacher before Miss Turner. She had relocated to Nashville after her resignation. It took 2 weeks to arrange correspondence. Her reply was brief at first, cautious, then in a second letter longer, more fragile. "I did not imagine it," she wrote. "I heard the knocking long before any child disappeared under my tenure. I believed it to be vermin at first. But the rhythm was consistent, counted as if waiting for something." She described feeling watched during lessons, a draft rising from beneath the 5th desk, the sense that the building had memory. "I left because I began marking absences that no parent could explain. Children who were said to have moved, but I had seen them the day before, seen them." The sheriff read that line repeatedly. If children had vanished during Briggs' tenure, why had no formal inquiry been launched then? Because no bodies were found. Because families relocated quietly. Because rural Tennessee in the 1870s did not question respectable donors. Because education was new, fragile, and politically valued. And because fear prefers silence. He compared Briggs' tenure ledger to Turner's. The older book was more worn. More hesitant, margins filled with faint indentations, more group tallies pressed lightly into corners, but the pattern matched. Every late autumn, every early spring. 5. Sometimes fewer, never more than 5 at once, as though the structure demanded that number, as though 5 was limit, or threshold. The sheriff returned to the excavation site again, this time with measuring tools. He widened the dig toward the tree line where the soil had appeared disturbed. 3 feet out from the foundation he found it a collapsed tunnel. Narrow, reinforced originally with scrap planks. Now partially caved in. It connected the chamber beneath the schoolhouse to the edge of the woods, hidden, concealed. Accessed without entering through the front door, he stood in silence for a long moment. This was not an accident, not a haunting, not hysteria. This was architecture. The tunnel bore marks too. Scratches along interior walls. Some low at child height, some higher adult height. He counted the tally marks again, 5 repeated, layered over older sets. This was not a crime of impulse, it was ritual. He walked directly to Horace Bellamy's estate. The old man had grown frail but remained lucid, respected. Seated by the fire, the sheriff did not accuse. He asked why was the foundation dug so deep. Bellamy's eyes flickered. For ventilation, and the tunnel, silence. The land was unstable, Bellamy said finally. You knew about the chamber. No, you knew children disappeared. Bellamy's hands trembled slightly. Children move, he whispered, not without trace. The sheriff leaned forward. You built it. Bellamy's gaze did not meet his. We needed progress here, he said quietly. Education, order. And this was order. Bellamy's voice thinned. There are things towns require. The sheriff felt a cold clarity settle over him. This was not madness of a teacher, nor random predator. This was structure embedded in the town's foundation. A place constructed with hidden purpose. A system protected by reputation. A building where absence was normalized. Where parents were told their children moved. Where records dissolved quietly. Where 5 at a time was acceptable, manageable, believable. He returned to the schoolhouse alone at dusk. Entered through the broken tunnel rather than the door. Lantern low, the air beneath felt heavy. He crouched in the chamber, looked upward through the exposed floorboards, imagined 5 desks above, 5 names written in ink, and beneath them layer upon layer of history. Counting, not days, not lessons, children. The teacher before the teacher had heard it. Miss Turner had heard it. The town had ignored it, and now the pattern was undeniable. The schoolhouse had not been built for education. It had been built to contain, and the ledger was not attendance, it was accounting. When he emerged, the sky was nearly black. Mill Creek slept uneasily, but the sheriff did not, because the final question was no longer what happened beneath the floor. It was who else knew. And how many years had the town chosen not to see it? The arithmetic of silence. Tennessee, 1882. The town did not gather the next morning. That was the first sign. No crowd outside the schoolhouse, no cluster of mothers, no fathers demanding answers. Only stillness. Mill Creek had entered its final stage, not grief, not denial, containment. Sheriff Calhoun understood it the moment he stepped into the general store. Conversation stopped when he entered. Eyes lowered. The air felt arranged. Someone had spoken to someone, word had traveled. But not toward truth, toward protection. Horace Bellamy did not leave his estate that week. Church services continued, fields were tended. Milk was delivered. Routine resumed with unsettling precision. The town was not panicked anymore, it was disciplined. And that frightened the sheriff more than the chamber beneath the schoolhouse ever had. Because panic is human. Discipline is collective. He posted guards at the excavation site. By the second night, they were gone. No explanation, no resignation, simply gone. When he questioned them later, they claimed illness, family matters, urgency elsewhere. No one wanted to stand beside the hole, not because of what lay beneath it, but because of what it represented. The sheriff reopened the tunnel one final time. He descended alone, lantern steady, breathing controlled. He stood in the chamber where bones had been uncovered, where tally marks scarred the beams, where children had carved initials before their voices were erased. He ran his hand across the wood again. 5 vertical lines, /5 again, grouped, accounted, measured. It was never chaos, never frenzy, never even visible violence. It was arithmetic. 5 at a time, never enough to collapse the town's stability, never enough to attract outside inquiry. Small disappearances, explained, absorbed, normalized. If 2 families moved quietly each year, who counted? If 3 children were said to fall ill elsewhere, who tracked it? If 1 or 2 vanished between harvest and frost, who compared seasons? No one. Because no one aligned the numbers. Until the ledger made alignment unavoidable. He climbed out and closed the tunnel. Then he did something the town would never forgive him for. He walked to the church. Sunday morning. Full congregation. Bell ringing. Hymns rising. He stood at the back until silence settled. Then he walked to the front and placed the attendance ledger on the pulpit. The book felt heavier than before. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He read. 5 names from October 17th. Then he read the names from previous autumns, previous springs. He read the number of tally marks carved beneath the floor. He read the count of bones recovered. And then he asked one question. How many children must vanish before we call it a pattern? The church did not erupt. It did not defend. It did not deny. It remained still, because everyone had known something. Just not enough to speak it. Horace Bellamy stood slowly from his pew. The old man's voice trembled, but not with weakness. With respect, Sheriff, he said carefully, you risk destroying the reputation of this town over speculation. Speculation? Calhoun replied quietly. You have bones, Bellamy said. You do not have names. The statement struck like cold iron. Because it was true. The excavation had revealed remains, but decomposition had erased identity. No clothing remained intact. No distinguishing marks survived. The ledger recorded attendance, but it did not record death. And without formal identification, the lore remained incomplete. The arithmetic was brutal. No confession. No direct witness. No surviving child. Only Patton. And Patton does not always convict. That night, Miss Turner packed her belongings. She left before dawn. No farewell. No address left behind. The town did not stop her. Teachers were replaceable. Buildings were repairable. Reputation was not. Within months, the excavation site was filled. New boards laid, the schoolhouse repainted, a new instructor appointed, attendance resumed, the ledger continued, neatly, orderly, normal. Sheriff Calhoun filed his report. Detailed. Measured. Precise. It was forwarded to the county seat, then to the state office, and there it rested. Because rural investigations in the 1880s required proof beyond Patton, and Patton alone threatened too many pillars: funding, church, donor influence, political alignment. The chamber beneath the schoolhouse was sealed officially that winter. Declared unstable, off limits, restricted. The tunnel collapsed entirely by spring. The structure remained. Years later, census records show Mill Creek's population steady. No mass exodus, no scandal, no arrests. Common School No. 3 operated until 1904. Then closed quietly. Listed as consolidated with district expansion. The building was dismantled, the lumber repurposed, the land sold. The attendance book survived, not because it was valued, but because it was ordinary. It was stored with tax records, ignored, unquestioned. Until decades later, when someone opened to October 17th and saw 5 names marked present. On a day the school did not open, the arithmetic of silence is simple. Take 5 pours. Take 5 again. Spread it across years, across seasons, across explanations. And the total never appears catastrophic. It appears manageable, until someone aligns the numbers. Mill Creek did not burn. It did not collapse. It did not revolt. It continued. Because silence protects structure, and structure protects power, even when the foundation is carved with tally marks. In the end, the sheriff retired early. He moved west. His final journal entry reads, I could not prove what the town already knew. The numbers were correct. The courage was not. The schoolhouse no longer stands. The tunnel is gone. The chamber filled. But somewhere in a county archive a ledger remains. 5 names, marked present, on a day that should have been blank, and beneath those names an entire town's decision, to count, but never to speak. If the attendance book had never been opened, if no one had aligned the dates, if no one had compared autumn to autumn, Mill Creek would still look ordinary. 5 children would still look like coincidence. 5 tally marks would still look like scratches in wood. And the schoolhouse would still be remembered as a place of learning, not accounting. That is the most unsettling part of this file. Nothing supernatural, nothing dramatic, no masked intruder, no midnight scream, just arithmetic, 5 at a time, small enough to ignore, consistent enough to hide. Because evil does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in increments. Sometimes it survives because it never exceeds the threshold of panic. Sometimes it is protected not by violence but by silence. And here is the question that remains. If Sheriff Calhoun had never aligned the pattern, if the chamber had never been widened, if the ledger had remained just another book on a dusty shelf, how many more names would have been marked present on days that did not exist? The schoolhouse is gone, the tunnel collapsed, the town still stands. But somewhere in Tennessee soil beneath a field that looks harmless there is a layer of earth that remembers, and wood that was carved by hands that counted. This was one ledger, one town, one structure built on quiet arithmetic. But history is full of institutions that look ordinary from the outside. And when you begin to compare the dates you start seeing patterns. In schools, in churches, in factories, in census records, in insurance books, in attendance logs, and sometimes the numbers do not describe presence, they describe removal. In the next file we examine a hospital registry from 1891. The doctor recorded 42 admissions in one winter, but only 23 discharge records exist. No death certificates, no transfer notes, no graves, just numbers that do not balance, and a basement that was sealed twice. If you're ready to open that record, subscribe. Because some mysteries are not solved by witnesses, they are solved by comparison. And once you start comparing, you cannot stop counting.